You're listening to Transcaster Radio, a podcast about trans life and all that goes along with it. You can listen to the show anywhere you enjoy podcasts, and we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review. It helps us reach more people, and we greatly appreciate it. Now, here's your host, Caden Taylor.
Hey, Transcasters. Welcome to this week's episode of Transcaster Radio. I'm your host, Caden Taylor. I hope you're all doing great this week. Today we're going to talk about male privilege. Yes, we all know what male privilege is, regardless of where you are in your transition or how you transition, or whether or not you're non-binary, if you're MTF, if you're FTM. We all know what male privilege is in American society. Male privilege is defined as a concept within sociology for examining social, economic, and political advantages that are available to men solely. So this is men, doesn't have to be a cisgendered men, just men in general. And it's on the basis of their sex. So when I transitioned and started presenting as male to society, I learned a lot about male privilege. I mean, I was female most of my life prior to transitioning, and there was a big difference between living life as a female and living life as a male. I mean, I didn't realize how much there was male privilege until that actually happened. This typically depends on how closely the male person matches in what society considers the masculine norms. And how do we define masculine norms? Do you have your own form of masculine norms? Does your friends define what your masculine norms are? How do you define masculine norms? Of course, I mean, society does depict what masculine norms are. If you're a flamboyant male, that's not what they consider to be a masculine norm. They want you to be a big, buff dude. I remember when I was starting my transition, how I felt the need that I needed to be that atypical male, that buff guy that had, abs, and what society depicts. It's the same thing as how Victoria's Secret wants their models to be thin and in shape and skinny, and how women, whether or not you're cis or trans, sees how they feel like they need to present to society. Male privilege has actually been studied before, and it's been studied for a decent amount of years. I mean, for as long as human beings have been around, no, but since 1970, they started actually studying about male privileges. And the studies began by examining barriers to the equity between men and women. We all know that women rights and women equal pay and other things that women have not been able to get throughout the last 100, 200 years. And how I have seen how society treats my fiance and how society treats me. And I see how society treated me prior to transitioning. It's interesting because in later decades after the 70s, research began to focus on the intersectionality and overlapping nature of privileges, not just between men and women, but they also took into consideration race, social class, sexual orientation, and other forms of things that we classify as social norms. As far as the United States, what we all like to be non-gender. Unfortunately, in the United States, we're a patriarchal society. We have been. I hope that we aren't always a patriarchal society. I do think that women are starting to more so nowadays to get, higher paying jobs and, becoming the CEOs and the executive directors, and they're becoming politicians. And I think I'm hoping that it's not going to be a patriarchal society forever. I don't think that it will be. But, stranger things have happened. So, do I think that it's going to switch overnight? No, I think, as we all have seen, it's been a slow process. And I think it continues to be a slow process. And not just in America, but most societies around the world are patriarchal societies. Uh, Patriarchal societies are, if you don't know, are where the male gender holds primary power. And they typically dominate roles such as political, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. I mean, look at our president. It's always been a male so far. Knock on wood, literally. Maybe we'll get a woman in office this coming year. I don't know. I know that males can't feel like they're entitled to everything always. And I think that even our younger generation, there are kids that are being taught that they deserve, male kids, okay, I'm talking about male children, boys, that are taught that they should get what they want regardless. And I just don't think that that's a way to empower the men that are growing up in society. I know for me, I get to choose to be the man I want to be. It wasn't ingrained into my head the moment I was born. And so it's, of course, a little different for trans people, than it is for cis people. But I do think that it's important that we teach the youth in our society that you have to work for what you get, and the men in society, to teach them that they got to work for what they get. It's not just hand fed to them. What women have today is considerably more than what they had 50 years ago, considerably more than what they had 100 years ago, 125 years ago, 150 years ago. But we still have a long way to go. And I think for me, I didn't personally, I think I've become more of a feminist now, being and transitioning, than I ever was when I presented as female. And I've talked to trans guys about this, and a lot of trans guys have told me the same thing, that they've become more of a feminist. And I'm not sure why. If anybody's out there that's a trans guy has become more of a feminist since transitioning, let me know, because I'm curious. Sorry guys, I lost my train of thought there. Part of the reason this still continues in the US and other countries is because women still become subordinate to men. It drives me crazy. There's somebody in my life in particular that I think about all the time, that I'm very close to, that is married and just serves on their husband and allows her husband not to do anything in the house. No chores. She serves him his food. She makes him that typical what my grandma is used to, being that subordinate wife, and that they're there to serve their husbands. And I'm sorry, but if we continue to allow this to happen and continue to do this as a society, women aren't going to get anywhere. And women are still going to be battered and still going to be beaten down by our patriarchal society. And we've got to stop allowing this to happen. This specific friend allows her husband to get away with this because she states that he works more hours than she does. So what? You're working at home. You still work a 40-hour plus work week. How is that okay with not allowing him to do things around the house? In my house, we do things 50-50. Of course, there are weeks that I give more than 50, and there are weeks that she gives more than 50. But in our house, it's a 50-50 swap. I mean, she's basically saying that her work week doesn't count towards the work that she puts in at the house on the nights and the weekends, where it doesn't matter if they work more. They should still have responsibilities at home to do things. And this goes for straight couples, trans couples, lesbian couples, gay couples. I don't care. There is, to me, there is no standard of what a male should do and what a female should do. It should be 50-50 across the board, regardless. To me, it's saying that she's allowing herself to be less than her husband, and she condones this behavior in herself as well as himself. He allows it too, and we've got to stop this. I mean, allowing yourself to be less than your other half, regardless if it's your husband, your wife, your partner, it doesn't matter. You have got to see that you are just as equal as your other half. By society allowing male counterparts, whether it's your husband, partner, boyfriend, boss, we allow patriarchal society to continue, and the fight for equality for women will never happen. The long-standing and unquestioned nature of this type of patriarchal system is being reinforced over the generations. That's what I talked to about how some youth are still getting the notion that male privilege is okay, that patriarchal system is okay. It makes privilege invisible to men. They just automatically think that they deserve it. It can actually lead for men to benefit from such privileges that they're ascribed special status to their own individual merits and achievements rather than to unearned advantages. Men, like I said, men automatically think that they deserve those merits or they deserve those achievements or advancements in the workplace when maybe they didn't really work for it. Maybe that woman that was on the same level as them worked 10 times harder and they actually didn't deserve that. This is something that we as a society need to look at. Sociologists see male privilege as being embedded in the structure of social institutions. Do you think so? I think so. I think that male privilege is something that especially comes in corporate society. I mean, I'm not saying that women don't have the CEO status. I do think that they do have CEO status. But I think that 90% of CEOs are male. And it's in our social structure. We have to break down our social structure in order to work it back to be something other than a patriarchal male privileged society. Like I talked about, men are often assigned to be authoritative figures, typically the boss over women in the workforce. Almost, I don't know the stats, but it's probably over 60%. I will look it up. Plus, women are typically seen as caregivers in society. So this dates back a long time, over 100 years, thousands of years. Women have been the caretaker of the men and the babies and the children. And my grandma talks about how she wasn't expected to work. She was expected to get married and have babies and pop the babies out and take care of them and have dinner on the counter on the table when her husband got home. And that was her life. And unfortunately, that was unfair to that generation and generations before that. It needs to be okay for women to work and not just be the caregiver in society. I know that society thinks that women are more caring and giving and than men are, but I think it's because men aren't ever given that opportunity from the minute they're popped out of their mother's uterus. But this also plays into the fact that male privilege is not equally shared across all males. I mean, when you think about it, this has to do with race as well. So if you're brown or black, it makes a big difference between a white man and the privilege a white man gets versus what a black or brown man gets. Ideal masculinity in the West is a white, heterosexual, stoic, typically wealthy, strong, tough, competitive, and autonomous man. We live in a society that it's not like that. It's not to the point that everything is white heterosexual male. So although all males benefit from male privilege to some degree, those who actually visibly differ from the norm may not benefit fully in certain situations. And look at black and brown people that are seen by police. And that's a prime example. Men who at some point in their life have experienced bullying or violence may not see they benefit from male privilege, which is interesting. I guess they think that since they were bullied, they don't get all the male. Just because you were bullied doesn't mean that you still don't get male privilege. We're going to talk more about toxic masculinity in a different episode. I'm going to do a whole episode about toxic masculinity. But toxic masculinity refers to certain norms that are associated with harm to society and to men themselves. So we'll talk more into that, but some coercive violence are linked to toxic masculinity. And toxic masculinity can go into anything with in regards to men, and it's been brought up a lot in my social circles with trans men as far as toxic masculinity goes. So I don't want to go too deep into it right now because I want to save that for a different episode. So sorry I went on a tangent there. So traditional stereotypes of men as socially dominant, along with related traits such as misogyny and homophobia, are considered to be toxic too. The socialization, if I could say that properly, of boys often normalizes violence by saying boys will be boys with regard to bullying and aggression. So maybe this goes back into why some men at some points in their lives have experienced bullying or violence feel like they don't get male privilege. One place that male privilege is talked about a lot is in the gender pay gap, which I touched on basically. But just so you know, men typically make 32% more than a woman in the same job. 32%. That is astronomical. I mean, to think that for me as a trans man that I switched my gender because that's who I am according to society, that I would make 32% more than the able-bodied person next to me, that is a woman, would be making 32% less than me. I mean, haven't we gotten to a point in society that we see women as equal? I mean, I don't know. I know, like I said, we have a long way to go and we have more to work with, but women are paid the disproportionate burden. It's placed on women. The disproportionate burden is placed on women when it comes to pay in society. Women are expected to be solely responsible for child care too, which puts a burden on their their ability to get a job. And I mean, do you know how expensive childcare is? Childcare is astronomically expensive, and if you have more than one child, it's some women have told me that it's actually less expensive and better, easier for them to afford if she stays at home and the husband works and she takes care of the children. Women are also more likely to be fired or denied advancement in their profession. We talked about that a little. And it puts them at a disadvantage economically relative to men. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on a few male privileges before I let you guys go for the day. So some things that I noticed during my transition is that males can dominate a conversation. Not saying that women can't dominate a conversation. I certainly think that they can, but I think men can dominate a conversation without being cut off by other people, where when women try to dominate a conversation, I think that other people try to butt in. So men are less likely to be interrupted. Another one is you're automatically assumed that you know what you're talking about. Just because you're a man doesn't mean that you actually know what you're talking about. So I think that this is something that as a society we need to stop thinking that just because they're a man, they know. Because I know a lot of men that talk out their ass and don't know what they're talking about. So this is a society male privilege that needs to go in the garbage. You're also, as a male, you're subject to less scrutiny when you speak, which I kind of touched on. Social norms allow you to take up more physical space. It's true. I mean, look at men. Not that I didn't do it when I was younger, but they spread their legs, where women feel like they need to take up less space. They cross their legs. You know, they get into almost a fetal position when they're sitting next to other people, where men don't care. They put their arms out. They spread their legs. You know, they feel like they want their presence to be heard and their presence to be known, and that there is nothing else that's going to take up their space. If you agree with me, tell me, because it's something that I have noticed since I started my transition. One of the things is you're less likely to be taken advantage of. This is so true when you go to a car dealership. I would never let my partner go to a car dealership to get a car by herself. Not because she's not competent enough, but because men who typically sell cars are try to take advantage of and don't allow a woman to speak or to try to negotiate a price. And I know because the way that I was treated when I bought a car when I was female presenting was totally different than how I was treated when I recently bought my fiance her new car. You're also not judged if you have a lot of sex with different people. We all know this is true. Women are called sluts and whores and every other name in the book when they have multiple partners. And men, you could have sex with 100 people and nobody gives a rat's ass. And the last thing is you're less likely to be targeted by street harassment or partner harassment or violence. And I'm not saying that men aren't harassed and targeted or have partner harassment or violence, because they certainly do, but they're less likely to have it than a woman. So that kind of goes into the gist of what I wanted to talk about today with male privilege, and I will have a different episode about toxic masculinity because I think it's an important topic, and I think there's a difference between toxic masculinity and male privilege, but we'll go more into that in a different episode. So I hope you guys had a great week. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening, and make sure to tune in next week for another awesome episode. Until next time, love life, live authentically, and as always, rise up.
Thank you for listening to Transcaster Radio. Be sure to visit transcasterradio.com to access the show notes and discover awesome bonus content.